Good morning. Aha, no sound. I can't hear your sound. Can you hear me? I can't hear you. You have a sound issue. Hello, everybody. There's Carolyn Shapiro, and we have a technical issue here. Can you hear me? If anyone in the chat could let us know whether you can hear me. There's an icon in the lower left beneath our photos, at least on my screen. Oops. What I'm going to do, Carolyn, can you hear me? What I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up the questions that you sent, and I'm going to start answering them. I'm going to ask and answer, and see if you can figure out how to turn that sound on. The first question is, what are your feelings, Dr. R, about taking Premarin, estrogen and testosterone via injections for HRT? And thank you. Well, we're really talking about the evolution and development of hormones. And these were early developments. Things have progressed, from my experience, tremendously since the days of Premarin and also estrogen and testosterone by injection. Like 1,000 years ago, the Chinese, as I mentioned before, they thought of having the young women collect all their urine, young, healthy, menstruating women, and then they would dry that urine out and there'd be a powder left behind. And then the aristocracy would be taking that powder. The aristocracy was treating themselves with hormones because the urine of young women had a bunch of hormones in it. And the same was done for young men, actually. And then in the 1940s, 50s, the pharmaceutical industry wanted to do widespread treatment of women in menopause, and it needed a large supply of hormones. So instead of collecting the urine of women, which would have been pretty much bioidentical, they collected, and there was actually some brief period in history where they were collecting the urine of pregnant women. But that never had traction and never got popular. But they did get mares, horses, pregnant, put them in stalls, catheterize them, because pregnant mares had an enormous amount of hormones. As far as the estrogens go, 50% of what the horses had, human women have never seen. But 50% of them were familiar. and they put them in pill form. They put a real heavy coating over those pills because beneath that coating you could smell urine. So they protected from the urine, the urine odor, and they called it Premarin, from pregnant mare urine. And it was tremendously popular. And they also developed a second cousin to this, Prempro, which they combined Premarin with Provera, which is an artificial progestin. It's got problems. Phyllis Brunson, PhD, a colleague of ours, scientist, has written extensively about this. I refer you to her work, which is most excellent. And she is pointing out the many different problems that develop with these progestins, as in contradistinction to bioidentical progesterone. And so by 2002, there were 18 million American women. 40% of all American women in menopause were on Premarin or Prempro. That's how popular it got. And why did it get so popular? Because it did a lot of good. There wasn't testosterone in that mix. There needed to be testosterone. Also needs to be replenished. But that Premarin and Prempro went a long way. And there was a tremendous misconception that based on a false reporting of a scientific article, the false reporting was that there was increased risk for breast cancer. In that scientific article, and in the follow-up to that scientific article, in which it was basically retracted, they learned that after 18 years of follow-up of these women, there was actually no increased risk of breast cancer, heart attack, or stroke. And another way to put that is women who were treated with Premarin and Prempro were at less risk for breast cancer, heart attack, and stroke than women in menopause who were not treated. I miss your voice, Carolyn. I wish you could solve this. There's icons beneath our photos, and one of them is a microphone. I don't know if that would help at all. Won't do anything, eh? So press on that little icon if it exists on your screen. So when that article came out, well, what happened that article came out in 2002 and scared everybody. But simultaneously in the 1980s, a forward-thinking pharmacist, Jim Hernser, dear friend and colleague, brilliant, and Dr. Jonathan Wright, a holistic medical doctor in Seattle, they came up, weren't communicating with each other, but they independently came up with the idea of why not get a hold of some bioidentical hormones that have the same molecular structure as are coming out of the ovary. Those were available. They knew they were available, and they procured them from pharmaceutical manufacturers who were already putting pure estradiol. Well, not exactly pure. They were combining that estradiol with another molecule called ethinyl for the birth control pills. But prior to that combination, which makes it patentable, that pure estradiol was available. So Jim Hernser took that pure estradiol and put it up in a carbopol gel. And Dr. Jonathan Wright also did a variation of that. He thought that not only was estradiol important, he thought that estriol, which was more prevalent of the three active estrogens, that would be estrone, estradiol, and estriol. Estriol was more prevalent and was associated in the medical literature with lessening the risk for breast cancer. So he formulated first a trias, but quickly moved to bias. That's a combination of estriol, 4 times as much estriol, and estradiol, biased. And He developed bioidentical biased, and progesterone was right around the corner, bioidentical, same molecule. Why? Because we look like humans. We don't look like plants. But the differences are not as extreme as what you think, because plants have hormones too, or hormonal precursors. And that's where the pharmaceutical manufacturers were getting the precursors to these hormones. They're getting it basically from soy and yams. And they were converting it under very sophisticated conditions into pure, molecularly identical, or as we call it, bioidentical, estradiol, testosterone, progesterone, DHEA. So this was gradually gaining traction in the 1980s and 1990s. Health-oriented patients sought out these health-oriented providers, and these hormones needed to be made up by pharmacists. Oh, they had a special name. Wasn't anything special about them. They were called compounding pharmacists. Well, every single pharmacist on earth was a compounder. That means they took basic elements and mixed them up and put them in potions and capsules and whatever form of delivery, various forms of delivery. And their main secret was they individualized it for the patient. And that was one of the main attractions. Not only was the pure molecularly identical hormones an attraction, rather than horse urine-derived hormones, the ability to individualize by telling the compounding pharmacy, I want this much of that, and this much of that, and that much of that, and you could do an infinite number of combinations, which is very, very important, because all men, for example, we look like males. But there's a tremendous amount of variation in every biochemical in our body. Some of us need this much testosterone to function beautifully. Others of us need this much. And there's everyone in between, and we're all normal. Same with women. Women you may look like, sort of, at least similar enough, but you vary enormously woman to woman. You're so individual biologically. So some women might need this much estrogen to menstruate and be fertile, have babies, whereas other women may need this much estrogen to menstruate, be healthy, be fertile, get pregnant. This could be 3 times as much as this, but all of these women are normal. All of them can be healthy. There's a range. So it calls for an individualization that is super critical in medicine. And you want to get it right, you want to get it elegant, you individualize, which makes these compounding pharmacists indispensable. And they're threatened because the big pharmaceutical companies have lost a lot of market share to these compounders. And this is another story, and I urge you to go to wethewomen.us or CBHRT Coalition, CBHRTcoalition.org, or compounding.com, and you'll see that these hormones are in jeopardy. Access to these hormones are in jeopardy. And there's something you can do about it. Absolutely, there's something you can do about it. And I refer you to those websites, and there's ways to contact the FDA. There's ways for you to personally contact your congressional representatives. This is America. I'm not going to say more about where the democracy of America is right now. So Premarin represented a significant public advance because millions of women could be treated And while it was rising to its being the most popular and profitable drug of all time, simultaneously over the preceding 20 years, compounded bioidentical hormones were also rising. Out in 2002, out comes this study when millions and millions of women abandoned taking hormones. And a lot of them didn't. And a lot of them turned towards compounded bioidentical hormones. And there's been a gradual return. And by 2016, when a study was done, there was about 6 million of the 18 million women in America who were in menopause, who were on hormones. And over half of them were on compounded bioidenticals. Why? Because they present the most elegant and most individualizable and the molecularly identical to a woman's body. And that's how everything works on this planet. You start out with the initial thing that can make a difference and can benefit humankind. And the first automobile that was produced was a really game changer. And now you look at the automobiles that are being produced today, there's a world of difference there. Today's automobile, especially the electrics, man, they're really a piece of technology that is just jaw-dropping in how amazing they are and what they can do. Well, the same has taken place in everything, in plumbing, in home heating, in anything that you can name, including medicine. What served us 30 years ago, that's great. But things have improved everywhere. The knowledge has increased, the experience has increased, the quality of the offerings and the tools have increased in every branch of medicine that you can think of. And that's what happened in the world of hormones. There's been improvements. So the only thing I ever prescribed in my whole life were compounded bioidenticals, because when I came on board with them in 1992, I saw the advantages. I liked the idea of the same molecule. And so I just did that. If Premarin was the only tool I had, I'd celebrate it. But things have advanced way beyond Premarin. And there's problems with oral estrogens to begin with. They're more risky. But things have advanced, and so injections, I don't really love injections. And, lo and behold, how many patients love injections? And it's not so great, because the moment you inject a hormone, you get this huge peak, and then it tapers off. Bravo. However, those huge peaks can be problematic. They can stimulate a compensation mechanism, a protection mechanism called SHBG, sex hormone binding globulin, which we've discussed several times in our Facebook Live. And it's just not biologic. It's just not physiologic. Much better to deliver things like estrogen and testosterone, for example, topically to the skin, individualized prescription for you, the individual woman. And the skin absorption is gradual and slow, and you don't get these big peaks. So injection, tell me how many of you like cold steel piercing your flesh? I'm a doctor. I've done a lot of needles. I tell you. And I've never, ever met a patient ever who really didn't wince a little bit when I was drawing blood or something, or giving them an IV or something. They knew it was good for them, but every single patient of all times did a little bit of a had my blood drawn this morning, and when that needle pierced my flesh, and this was with a woman who's been drawing blood for 22 years, and she was as expert as they come. When that cold steel pierced my flesh, it wasn't cold. Oh my God, I did feel it. I said, this is not something I'd like to do every single day or twice a day. And some of these hormones, it's much better to do twice a day. It's much more physiologic, like bias, for example, We always have women divide their bias dosage into morning and evening, and there's reasons for that. So injections, if it was the only tool I had, okay, let's do it. I would definitely go for daily injections. That'd be more physiologic. Oops, who in the heck wants to do daily injections? So injections have sort of settled in, at least for men, into 2 times a week, sometimes once a week. Used to be once a month. Why? Because the men didn't love cold steel piercing their flesh either. This was gender non-specific, I'll tell you. Didn't matter, male or female. Ain't nobody I've ever seen loves having that needle. So for several reasons, I'm not a fan of injections. I'm a great fan of injections for intravenous vitamins and minerals and some of the amazing things that we can do with intravenous treatment. There's some medications that are life-saving that need to be injected. Insulin and some needs to be injected. Man, this fabulous daily injection of insulin or more than one time a day. I'm all for it. That is the way to go. It's a gift from heaven above. So there's some things that are really appropriate, but the state of the art in treating women in menopause is topical application of biased and topical application of testosterone. You can give progesterone and DHEA topically. You can also give them by capsule or pill. You can customize the dose for that as well. I prefer the topical, but sometimes we definitely go to the oral for progesterone and DHEA only, not for bias, not for testosterone. Testosterone, you say? Well, a young woman has more testosterone than she has estradiol. Gee whiz, it is not a male hormone. Testosterone is critical for females. I mean critical, because one of the things that is so common in aging is you lose your muscles, sarcopenia, and you wind up with canes, walkers, wheelchairs, and adult diapers because of that. In assisted living facilities and nursing homes, testosterone is critical, getting it right, for a lot more reasons than that. So, my preference, topical biased, you apply it to your skin, and topical testosterone. We always start with topical progesterone and DHEA. And my real preference is, what do you mean? Do you apply, how do you apply it to your skin? Well, it's available in creams and gels, and it's available in certified organic oils. And gee whiz, I'm a big fan of administration and certified organic oils, because you're rubbing something in your skin twice a day. You're basically rubbing in a quart of whatever you're rubbing in twice a day. So for over a course of a year. And the creams and gels have some toxic potential to them. So we abandoned that 18 years ago, invented and patented the organic oils. So my favorite of my favorite of my favorite, in fact, the only thing we do in the menopause method is topical biased and testosterone in an organic oils base, and topical progesterone and topical DHEA, or sometimes we'll put the progesterone in an oral capsule. There you go. That's what I like for HRT. And you know, anything can be done to benefit, but why not go for the best of the best? It's so obtainable. Carolyn, oh, gee whiz, where you must have a significant case of laryngitis or computeritis. Do you want to try rebooting? Did you try rebooting your computer? You're going to do that. Okay. And I'll go on to the next question, which is, I want to deal with the one that Carolyn was leading me towards. Can Dr. R please explain why it is that bias is better than just estradiol only? Yes. The human ovary puts out 3 active estrogens. Estradiol is the most potent one. And when people think of estrogens, they're usually thinking of estradiol. And here comes Carolyn. Can she talk? No. I miss your voice there. What is that about that, Carolyn? I'm looking if there's some button that I can press that would help us out here, but it doesn't look like it. So I'm answering the question about the bias. So the human ovary puts out 3 estrogens. Estradiol, that's the most potent one. It puts out a second estrogen called estrone. That's about 80% as strong as estradiol. And it's a little more than twice as prevalent as estradiol. So the body has more estrone in it than it has estradiol. 2+ times as much estrone as estradiol. And it's really one of its functions is it's the form that estrogen is transported in around the body. And it's got a third estrogen called estriol. And it turns out that estriol is the most prevalent of all the 3 estrogens. There's more estriol. In fact, there's 1.2 times as much estriol as there is the sum of estrone and estradiol. Estriol is not as potent as estrone or estradiol. In fact, it's about 1/8 as potent as estradiol. But it's more prevalent than the sum of the both of them. Isn't that interesting? How'd that happen? Well, Dr. Wright found a medical study that was done by an oncologist at the University of Nebraska in the late 60s. He published a lot of studies. Oncologist is a cancer specialist. And this doctor's name was Henry Lemon. And he wondered if hormones had anything to do with breast cancer. Now, cancer has a multitude of causes. So I would never pin it down to a single cause, no way. Immune system's involved, lots of things are involved, lots of assaults on the health of someone to be able to develop cancer. But as far as it relates to hormones, Dr. Lemon did this experiment. He did 24-hour urines on young, healthy menstruating women and also on women who had breast cancer. And what he found was that young, healthy women, on the average, had 1.3 times as much estriol as they had the sum of estrone and estradiol. Whereas women who had breast cancer had a lot less estriol, a lot less. They had more estrone and estradiol than they had estriol. And he published this, and he thought it was related to breast cancer. And Dr. Wright, the amazing pioneer that he is, thought, why in the world would we want to do anything other than copy nature? So if we're going to design hormones for women, why don't we take the original design and put in more estradiol than the sum of estrone and estradiol? And he came up with biased. And for most, but not all, women, if you do 80% estradiol and 20% estradiol, on a 24-hour urine hormone test, you produce a pattern of estrogens and the metabolites that look like a young, healthy menstruating woman. Copy nature. That's where bias was born. Duh. Copy nature. Don't invent a new form of human being. Take the original design. And that's what Dr. Wright did. And that was one of his most amazing contributions. And so we always, 100% of the time, the initial prescription of estrogen that we do is biased. 80% estradiol, 20% estradiol. Sometimes we change those percentages, but we have to look at a 24-hour urine hormone test to be able to see why we make those changes. Now, lo and behold, 20 years, almost 20 years after Dr. Lemon proposed the importance, more than 20 years after Dr. Lemon proposed the importance of estradiol, and about 18 years after Dr. Wright invented biased. He didn't invent biased. The divine invented biased.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Carolyn Shapiro, welcome to your show.
Well, we share it, but that was like major trigonometry I just did.
That's great.
Oh, Dr. R, sweet you. Thank you for everything you're saying. Heard it all. Go ahead. Sorry to interrupt.
All right. So, in the late 1990s, the estrogen receptor sites were discovered. And here's what we learned about them. In a young menstruating woman, there's a couple phases to her cycle. The first phases, days 0 to 12, there's a buildup to ovulation. And that's not the only thing happening feminine-wise. There's actual preparation for possible pregnancy. So you get proliferation of the uterine lining. You get a brand new uterine lining to receive the potential of a fertilized egg. You start preparing for breastfeeding the first half of every cycle. Go figure. This is how uniquely designed we are. And you start getting proliferation of breast glandular cells. You get cell division. You get new cells.
Well, do all of these cells have these receptor sites on them?
Yes, they do.
Okay.
All of them do. And I'll get to what those receptor sites are in just a minute. Now, let's say you get pregnant. You get continued proliferation. Breasts get a lot larger. You get preparation for lactation. Let's say you don't get pregnant. Well, a lot of women can feel over the first 14, 20 days of their cycle, their breasts have gotten larger, even full, and definitely more full. A lot of women can feel that. And it's a matter of, part of why they're more full is there's more cells formed there. Proliferation, cell division. If the woman does not become pregnant, there's a whole deproliferation. The deproliferation of the uterine lining leads to sloughing of the uterine lining called menstruation. The deproliferation of breast glandular cells, the additional cells actually undergo disappearance. A process I think is so beautifully named apoptosis.
I was just going to say.
They disappear. And somewhere in the cycle, a woman's breasts get less full. Deproliferation. Well, when the estrogen receptor sites were discovered, what they learned about them is there was two of them, two major ones. One of them was the type that prepared for proliferation. That was known as estrogen receptor site alpha. And the other came into activity if deproliferation was necessary, as in no fertilization. And that's called estrogen receptor site beta. And it turns out the main stimulant of estrogen receptor site alpha is estradiol. And the main inspiration / stimulant to estrogen receptor site beta is estradiol. And so estradiol has a deproliferative function. We don't want mitosis in a 50, 60, 70-year-old woman. We don't need cell division. There is exceptions, but we'd rather not have it. We'd rather not have breast glandular cell new cells taking place in a midlife woman and beyond. That's why there's this emphasis on estradiol. Now, all Dr. Wright suggested was copy nature. Well, nature was set up for deproliferation should there not be implantation.
Yeah.
That's the difference in the receptor sites. That's why we choose biased. We lean towards deproliferation. We don't want breast glandular cell proliferation in a midlife woman.
You know, I want to ask you just one question here, because we talk about this from time to time, that the pituitary gland is the gland in the brain that sends out the messages, and it just keeps going and going and going, sending out these messages for hormones to be put out, but we've outlived them, sort of, kind of.
Well, that's an interesting piece of information, and like our brains and our pituitary gland and the ovaries and lots of other things are all linked together. They're all one system. And if the brain thinks that there isn't enough estrogen around, it's going to signal the hypothalamus, which is going to signal the pituitary gland to put out a powerful pituitary hormone called follicle stimulating hormone. And that's going to stimulate the production of estrogen. This doesn't at all relate to estrogen receptor sites.
True.
This is like another topic.
Sorry.
No, yeah, it's an interesting topic. And what makes it interesting to me is some people say that menopause is natural. And yet the evidence, the biological evidence, doesn't necessarily say that. Because when a woman's brain / pituitary senses her estrogen is low, as when she is ceasing to produce estrogen out of the ovaries, it tries to stimulate the ovaries back into action. And the follicle stimulating hormone increases astronomically. It goes really high. It really wants those ovaries to stay online and keep going. And the fascinating thing is, it never lets up. It keeps on staying high. And in an 80 and 90-year-old woman who hasn't menstruated for 30, 40, 50 years, her FSH is really high. One wonders how healthy that is. Some say it's not healthy. Some say it relates to weight gain. The pharmaceutical industry is working, is what I've heard, on a medicine, a drug, that will lower the FSH to be effective in weight gain, believing that if they can lower the FSH, a woman will have less tendency to gain weight at midlife. It has something to do with weight. That's not its principal function, but that's the belief. And they think they're so serious about it, they're developing a drug, a patentable drug that they're going to market as a weight loss drug. And what it does is it lowers FSH. And Dr. Wright and I were talking one day, and he had a big laugh. He said, "Did they ever think of using estrogen to lower the FSH?"
Right.
Because any woman that's properly treated in menopause with biest, one of the signals that it's all working, not the only one by a long shot, is the FSH lowers, because the pituitary doesn't think, oh, we got to really get some more estrogen out here. So it's an interesting topic. It's not exactly related to the receptor site or the bias question,
No,
but
and
it's an interesting one, and it's relevant because weight gain is a very significant issue.
huge.
Well, they can't patent estradiol as a FSH lower because you can't patent a molecule that's already present in the human body.
Right.
So they're trying to come up with a drug to lower the FSH. So at any rate, why don't
Sorry
you ask,
about
why don't
that.
you ask the next question?
Well, we have a few. And you did a great job without me. I mean, I don't know how that's possible, but you did. And I'm kidding, of course. You always do a great job. Um, there's a woman who is writing that she's completely freaking out. Her breast ultrasound report came back showing up as an 8 millimeter cyst. She has yet to speak with her primary, but she's thinking she's going to need a breast biopsy, and she's really, really worried, which I understand. Many of us do, as do you. Um, and she says, I don't know what to do about my hormones. Do I keep taking them? Do I not keep taking them? I was wondering if you have any thoughts on this, please. I appreciate it very much because I am like really sufficiently freaking out here.
Excellent question. The hormones isn't the issue here.
Mm,
The issue is, what is the status of the breast? Now, at this day and age, there are such fabulous diagnostic and treatment options for the breast and breast illness and breast cancer that, from my perspective, this is being discovered and it's being dealt with. And good physicians really know how to deal with this one. And for example, there's several different specialties involved in this one. There's the breast cancer specialists, they're surgeons. There's the cancer specialists, they're oncologists. There's the radiologists, they have imaging techniques that are just amazing. I wouldn't at this stage deal with thermography because thermography is not a good cancer detecting tool, not NOT. And this woman is getting this investigated. And I understand the fear,
well,
but I've been working with women and men for so long that this day and age, that let's go to the worst case scenario. I'm not saying this is it. I'm not saying that a cyst, there's so many cysts diagnosed. This is not, there's so much more information that her doctor is going to learn from the imaging studies. So just saying that there's a cyst there isn't informative enough, but the doctor she's going to be seeing is going to have the report in hand, and the radiologist and the imaging specialist is going to know what the next step is. And Just say that, let's just go to the worst case scenario. You catch a breast cancer early enough, and there's almost 100% cure rate. And this is a very early thing. It sounds like whatever it is, but 8 millimeter cyst. This is a very small, whatever it is. And cysts in the breast are so common. I mean, I grew up in an era when they had a different name. It was called fibrocystic breast disease.
Right.
And it wasn't cancer. And so we don't even know if this is anything but a cyst. And sometimes radiologists will say, this is just a cyst, follow it, get a mammogram in 6 months. I don't know. I'm not in possession of the kind of information that's written on that report. But worst case, it's cancer. And who wants to go through a cancer treatment process? Nobody. But you come out the other side and you're good. And even if you get chemo and your ovaries go down, I think she's menopausal already. We've
Uh,
got these hormones. Yeah, she's taking hormones, so she's probably menopausal already. So the elephant in the room is, what is the nature of this cyst? And I tell you, it could be anything from a simple cyst that they're just going to advise you to follow it. Or they could say, this is suspicious, we want to do a biopsy. Now, the kind of biopsy, and I'm not an expert at this is not my field of expertise, but the kind of biopsy, if someone's going to biopsy something in the breast, I would much prefer that they do something called an excisional biopsy. That means they're going after that whole cyst. They're not sticking a needle in it. They're going after the whole cyst plus some healthy margins. Now, 8 millimeters is very small. So you're not talking about this big hunk. You're talking about very small. So you go to remove the whole thing that's being visualized there, plus a certain amount of healthy tissue. That in itself can be the end. It's called a lumpectomy. It's more than a biopsy, and I would, if it was a relative of mine, I would urge the breast surgeon to do that and not stick a needle in it. They're aware that they've got chemo to back them up if they stick a needle in it, and some of the breast cancer cells going along the needle tracks. I don't know, the breast cancer surgeons, they're expert at this. They know what their literature says about this. But what I'm talking about is an excisional biopsy, otherwise known as a lumpectomy. And they're going to take some lymph nodes too, usually, when they want to go that far. But she hasn't given me any information that makes me think, oh, this is going to go further. But it could.
right.
I want to take you to the bottom line that this day and age, finding something this small, and all they're doing is calling it a cyst, no matter what that thing is, and it could be a simple cyst. We find those all the time. No matter what that is, there's a cure available because you found it this small. This is what I love about mammograms. Is occasionally they find one of these things that nobody was aware of. And 50 years later, the woman doesn't even remember that she had it.
Right. Yeah. Right. I know that Dr. Blooming had made mention of many women having a ductal carcinoma in situ, uh, which means it was encapsulated in the milk ducts of the breast. They had no idea, and they just lived till 90, 95 with this DCIS, no problem, and that was that. For
And
them.
I am a fan of, because men, for example, as a male, I'm at risk for hundreds of cancers. Some of them are not good.
Ugh.
And I'm at special increased relative risk for prostate cancer. And there's reasons for that. Millions of men have prostate cancer. Millions. And women are at special risk for breast cancer. And there's reasons for it. But when detected early, this is a great time in human history to have a 8 millimeter, whatever it is, but it could be a simple cyst, and they're going to say just follow the thing. So I understand there's anticipation concern here, and I can't assist you with that so much, but you're doing the right thing. You're on the track of getting this diagnosed, and whatever it turns out to be, you may have a very pleasant surprise when they say, no, we've seen a lot of images, and this one is not one to worry about. We're just going to follow you up in 6 months. Could be that, or they could say, we want to biopsy this. And then you say, I'd like to find a breast surgeon who will do an excisional biopsy, a lumpectomy. That's my best advice. You still may need chemo. You still may need more. They're going to take lymph nodes. All of it's important, but I can't eliminate all fear, but I can say, good for you for finding this early, and it may be nothing and it may be something. But it's a good time in history, even if you have the something that you're most concerned about.
Yeah, I think a lot of us women, certainly having been there myself, quite a few years ago, it's pretty scary. And I appreciate your answer, Doctor R. I do, and I appreciate your putting up with my silence this morning. I'm so sorry. Um, the next question says, um, uh, I'm titrating up on my estrogen, and now I'm having my period again every few weeks. And she's only titrating up slightly. Her estrogen is low at 28 via blood testing. She does take progesterone. She says, when I look at old tests, when I was in my perimenopausal days, my estrogen levels were exactly the same. I'm not sure what to do now. Do I reduce the estrogen, even though I'm having these horrible symptoms? When I was just below my bleeding levels, all of my menopausal symptoms were bad, but now they're in full swing. And no one can seem to give me any kind of answer whatsoever as to what to do. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on that.
I have exactly 3 minutes as I have an early heart stop, as I have another.
So that's a great question to ask for that 3 minutes, huh?
Yeah, that was a great one. There's more to
Gotta
be
be
done
hard.
here. When I see bleeding that is not entirely explainable, I want to get a transvaginal ultrasound. This is in the province of the gynecologist. They are totally equipped to evaluate unusual bleeding. And because I want to know if there's a fibroid there, I want to know obviously there's a thick endometrium. I want to know that that endometrium is relatively healthy. So everyone loves to go to a doctor. Oh boy, I'm being
Not
facetious. I'm being facetious, of course. But it's time to go to one and be very grateful that they know all that they know, because gynecologists know a lot, and they know a lot about bleeding. And they can take a very simple transvaginal ultrasound. And they can learn a lot. And sometimes they got to go further. Sometimes they have to do a biopsy. But when there's bleeding like this, and it's so touchy there, that if you drop just a little bit to stop the bleeding, you get raucous menopausal symptoms. Something's not right.
right.
So and the something that's not right might be the potency of what you're taking. So what's missing from this question, and this questioner is fine to submit a second question. When you say your estrogen's low at 28, I don't know what time they drew your blood in
Right.
relationship to when you took your last hormone dosage. And we're trying to investigate as to, are there steady state levels where it doesn't matter what time you take your blood. But my suspicion is it's very dependent on when you took your last dose and what method you're using to take it. what's going on. Well, how are you dosing this? Are these topical estrogens? Are they pill form estrogens? One thing I'd recommend is that you download our book from Carolyn's website, Facebook page. You get a little more background, but my main thing to say is, without me knowing the dosage of what you're on and the strength of what you're on, if you're on a very strong estrogen and you're taking it by injection or something, or by pellet, or even a very strong topical cream, or you're taking it orally, that could really factor into why you're getting bleeding, because you could be on overdose there. But I don't know the numbers, so you can submit the numbers to Carolyn, and we can do a second round of this.
Got
But
it.
my first advice would be, if you're on reasonable dosages and a reasonable administration procedure, and you're having touchy bleeding, I always, 100% of the time, I give the woman a referral to a gynecologist, just so we can rule out that there's not a fibroid, which is it's not malignant. It's just something that can really cause bleeding, and there's not something in there that needs to be dealt with, like an endometrial cancer. Those are very rare, but I've seen two in my career, 28 years of working with women. So we want to know that, and once you know that most of the time we learn that there wasn't anything, there isn't any anatomical problem, then we can really play with the dosages. And that's what you need to do, is play with the strengths, play with the dosages, titrate it properly. And that's why I recommended our book, is how do you titrate the dosages just so you get enough to alleviate your symptoms, but not too much that you bleed. First step, call your gynecologist, or find one. Your friends know one if you don't. I've got to go, Carolyn. I'm going to have to do a hard stop. I'm going to have to sign us off right away. Oh my God, because I went an extra minute.
Hasta la vista. I'll see you next Tuesday.